Let's get started. Apologies for the late start. We had some logistical issues and some folks were down in the Borough President's office. Welcome to the March 2019 meeting of CB1's Land Use, Zoning, and Economic Development Committee. I'm Patrick Cannell. I'm chair of the committee along with Diana Sweetai, who's our director of Planning and Land Use for Community Board 1. We have two items on the agenda. A third one, I think, was tentative, and we can talk about whether we move forward with that. But first up is our now monthly update from representatives with the mayor's office to talk about the borough-based jail system plan and specifically the Manhattan Detention Center, what we've been talking about as a committee for quite some time. So who's presenting? Okay.
So hi everyone, my name is Joseph Thomas. I'm a senior community liaison with the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit, and I'll let the city team introduce themselves.
Rebecca Clough, Associate Commissioner with TDC.
David Kaplan, Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice.
Nicole Torres, Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice.
And so our office had the opportunity to speak with the community board about some of the updates that they would like for this one. So I'm just going to read off some of the things that have been said. So one of the things that was asked was relevant feedback that we've received from the Neighborhood Advisory Committee. And so the Neighborhood Advisory Committee was a group that was put together by the Mayor's Office, which has representatives from Community Board 1 to talk about the issues of the borough-based jails within specifically the Manhattan site. And so we've had 4 meetings so far with the NAC group, and these past few meetings have been really trying to understand what are some of the main concerns as it relates to the building itself and where it's going to be placed at 124, 125 White Street. So we had sort of groups divided to talk about the quality of life issues that would be coming in there, the transportation concerns that would be going in there, and for transportation, I personally sat on that group discussion. They focused a lot not only on the public transportation, as in the buses and the subways, but just what the construction impacts were going to be during the time when the construction was going on, as well as what was going to be happening operationally for when the building was going to be in place. And they gave us some great suggestions on things that we can do as this project is going along, such as coordinating with the community board on assembling a task force to make sure that the community board and the community remains updated on the issues that are present, as well as thinking about some potential investments that should be coming in terms of making sure that traffic is flowing smoothly and that there isn't too much of a cease of the traffic that might be going on there. The community board also asked us to talk about any new information that we had on a toggles discussion, which we presented at the last meeting. And what the toggles are were just things that the city is looking at in order to reduce the height of the building. Some of the things we talked about was a centralization of the women's population, the moving of state technical parole violators out of the city jail system into the state system, and stuff along those lines. While we don't have any updates to provide right now from our last discussion, as soon as we do have updates, we'll make sure to inform the community board of that. One of the third things they wanted to ask about was, after the ULURP process, should the plan be voted on and passed, what our community engagement strategy was going to look like during that process. So I'll have Rebecca talk about the post-ULURP community engagement, but during the ULURP engagement, just wanted to reiterate the city's commitment to continuing community engagement. That means if the community board wants us to come and talk about it, we're welcome to. We would love to come back again. But also meeting with community-based organizations and other groups to update them about the plan. We're committing to doing that as well. And I'll let Rebecca talk about the other portion there.
Good evening. Rebecca Clough, Associate Commissioner for the Borough Jails at the Department of Design and Construction. Excuse me, the Mayor's Office has asked me to discuss going forward how will the community be involved. We are hiring a program management consultant who is a specialist in design build, correctional facilities. They will have community engagement consultants on board who will be engaging different groups throughout the community. We will probably be setting up a bi-weekly meeting with community members. We'll work with the Mayor's Office as to who should be on that committee or who wants to be on that committee. And from that group, we'll be talking about performance characteristics of the building, what not so much specifically what it would look like, but you want glass, you don't want glass, you want concrete, you don't want concrete, you want brick, those kinds of things, how the building has to be set up so that people understand why it's going to look like whatever it ends up looking like, how tall it will be, how dense, the bulk. We're going to try and reduce the height as much as we can by trying to be as creative as possible as how the housing areas can be put together, how spaces can be sort of massaged into a smaller area but have the same square footage. There's a lot of inefficiency in the current design, so we will be continuing for the next 6 months till we issue what we call the request for qualifications, which will be in March of next year. And at that point, we have to have the specifications completed so that it can go out to the general industry. So.
Can I ask a question?
Wait, hang on, let's let him finish. Are we,
So there was one more thing we want to talk about, the information on the mapping of White Street. However, our person from the Deputy Mayor of Operations Office hasn't arrived yet, so I would welcome questions now while we're waiting
Great.
for that person to arrive.
Joe?
What inefficiencies do you see in your current prisons?
Well, the plan as it's designed, the consultants were tasked to find a solution to the site.
To what inefficiencies?
Well, they were tasked to find a solution to the housing on the site. But it takes a lot of time and effort to squeeze that piece down to as small as it can possibly be. So they found a solution that works. It's logical, it's programmatically, everybody will be where everybody's supposed to be. But let's say the day room might be longer than we want it, so we may be able to rearrange rooms so that they make it a smaller area. There's the program spaces are programmed for the site, has everything from the size of the janitor's closet to the warden's office. So in order to make everything fit, some things might have ended up a little larger than that and some a little smaller. So they'll go through and they'll find those kinds of inefficiencies and balance them out.
And just to give that additional context, so Rebecca's talking about the inefficiencies of how, you know, those pieces, kind of the building blocks
Right.
fit together. We are also looking at whether there's changes that can be made to the program altogether. So we're looking at what the programmatic changes are. Rebecca and Dale simultaneously, as we make changes to the program, are looking at can that program fit together more tightly in the space.
Efficiencies.
Rebecca, you mentioned the design in the context of these efficiencies. How detailed of a design currently exists?
Not very. It's really making sure that the boxes for the cells that are a certain size, to make sure they all have a window, to make sure that they are far enough apart, that they have the toilet facilities they need. It's very general.
Where can the public access?
I'm sorry?
Where can the public see these designs? Where might they be available to have a
I
look?
have to defer to, it's the CSD. I don't have them myself.
They don't have them yet.
In whatever form you do.
They're
That's what I meant.
sketch forms, they're not
Are those available? Dana?
It's
comprehensive.
the same old.
Yeah, well, I just have to make sure that I understand we have some materials that we've shared that we can recirculate. I'll figure out what it is that.
I haven't been to all the meetings,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you're.
They're supposed to come back with an answer.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah.
Wait, hang on a second. So just for everybody's benefit, we're going to let the members of the Land Use Committee ask their questions first, and then we'll take a few from public. Thank you. Alice?
I really would love an explanation, and I know that we asked for this the last time, of a very comprehensive explanation as to why the city dismantled or no longer is going forward with the $500,000+ building on Rikers Island that was planned only 5 or 6 years ago. What was wrong with that building? It was a terrific piece of architecture by some people, thought it was quite beautiful, very illustrious firms that had built it. There was all sorts of planning involved in it. I'm just curious, what happened to that? What was wrong with that? And why are we moving to a vertical version, it looks like, of a horizontal building? that was already planned and already had, I think I read $94 million worth of money already put into the ground. So what's that about?
No, well, I can tell you that it was nowhere near $94 million. Basically, what was done on that project was to demolish the sprungs that were put up in the 80s. That was about $1.5 million, and then we did some preliminary drainage for the site, and cleaned it up, realigned some pipe, things like that. There was no, the total maybe 20, but the buildings, the modulars that we took down were a fire hazard, so it wasn't money wasted.
And I think that, we talked about this a little bit, but we had decided that it was not going to be possible to achieve the overall criminal justice reform goals by just rebuilding new facilities on Rikers Island. That isolation of Rikers Island itself, the challenge of public transportation and accessing the courts from Rikers Island, the challenge in people being able to visit, access to attorneys, were all negative impediments to the city's justice goals overall. That was a policy decision that was made by this administration. It was certainly something that was also recommended by the Independent Littman Commission, by a number of different criminal justice organizations, and so when it became clear that we were not going to be able to achieve the criminal justice reform goals just by rebuilding new facilities on Rikers Island, we began to advance this plan.
And likely you won't be able to achieve criminal justice reform with one vertical large tower in the middle of downtown Manhattan either, and criminal justice reform obviously had many layers. I mean, I bring it up because I think it was a Bloomberg project. It was a very expensive and very well thought out project, and you're asking the public now to accept that it's hard to get to the island. It's hard to get to every island. What about more investigation of ways to have combated that? I assume that was part of that proposal just 5 years ago. So I just was curious, and I think it's a shame to see that having just been sort of forgotten. I don't know, I guess I have to just trust that the Littman report was so convincing that was, and Just Leadership was so, powerful in their advocacy that we're seeing the results of it. I thought one of the positions that was taken in the Littman report that's the most convincing, which Judge Lippman himself is not in favor of these tall buildings, of course, is smaller jails throughout the borough. Where is that proposal in the midst?
Yeah, so I'll say that the decision to close the jails on Rikers Island was not a policy decision that the mayor's office took lightly, that there was a great deal of consideration and deliberation of that, and it took some time for the mayor's office to make this the official policy, so I certainly appreciate, the fact that some people might disagree, but I do want to just affirm that this was not a decision that was taken lightly, and that there was great deliberation and consideration as to whether this was something that we could achieve by rebuilding on Rikers Island, and the conclusion for a number of reasons was that we could not. The Littman Commission had recommended that there be, I believe that there's a lot of synchronicity between what our current plan is and what the plan is that was recommended by the Littman Commission and what the Littman Commission is currently recommending. The distinction is that the Littman Commission did recommend a facility on Staten Island, and that is not currently part of the administration's plan. They did not, however, recommend a number of, multiple facilities throughout the city. They were recommending 5 facilities citywide. We are proposing 4 facilities citywide. What the Littman Commission has recommended is something that we actually completely are aligned with, which is that while we don't want to lose the purpose of these facilities, which is to have better conditions such as more program space, more recreation, smaller housing unit size, we do need to be mindful as to how these can be best integrated into each neighborhood. And so the Commission recommends that we consider ways to reduce height. The administration and our office is very, very aggressively focused on how we can also bring down the height of these proposed facilities. And so that was the conversation that we presented on, I believe, the last meeting, is the number of variables that we're looking at. Everything from, as Joseph said, considering the centralization of women, considering whether there are some subpopulations, such as people with particularly acute medical, mental health, behavioral health issues that could be better served outside of the detention facility, or whether there's modifications that could be made to things like inefficiency rate, housing unit size, number of housing units on a floor that would bring down the size as well. So I think we are very much focused and in alignment with what the Lippman Commission's recommendations are.
Paul?
So, in these types of facilities, do you anticipate the need for additional security personnel? I'm not talking about corrections, I'm talking about NYPD or other types to manage all the flow of traffic into the area, all the, I don't know, do you anticipate that there could be any need to have more police assigned to it? And if so, would those police come from our local precinct, or would there be additional police assigned to manage this type of facility, all the traffic and all the other conditions that may result?
So we don't anticipate that there will be a need for any additional law enforcement or security personnel outside of these facilities. And I think to the question of whether there are concerns around traffic or security, I think maybe Julia or others can speak on the environmental impact assessment. But just to to give some context, I think we've certainly engaged with the NYPD local precinct commander about whether there have been any concerns or issues that have been a cause for PD response as a result of the existing DOC facility. And we've gotten positive feedback back from him that the existing facility has not merited a special response from NYPD, nor has there been any
Good.
uptake from crime or anything as a result of that.
But I guess traffic, people
Yeah.
pulling up in Ubers or whatever.
So I think during construction, you would likely see a form of police officer that's called a traffic enforcement agent to help manage pedestrian movements and vehicular movements around a construction site. And that is a separate unit and a centralized unit that the police department has, so it doesn't take away the resources from the area. We don't anticipate needing additional traffic management folks, but if we did, that would also be traffic enforcement agents from a centralized unit. So it doesn't take from the resources of the
I
facility.
have to think about that.
Other questions from the committee? Joel?
So I understand, how you came to the conclusion, and I know it's a very progressive plan by the mayor's office, but I mean, how much did minimizing the effect on the community have against it? I mean, how much did the scales tip? I mean, was it justice and community over here? Was it more 50-50? I mean, how much really did you guys think about what the fallout would be from the community? And how much of that did you take into consideration? Or this was just so overwhelming that it wasn't even part of the plan?
So I think that one of the things that we've looked at has been what has been the impact of the existing DOC facilities in the neighborhood. So has there been any negative impact on crime or property value? The answer has been that there has not. We looked at studies from across the country that have also affirmed that there's not a negative impact on property values or crime when there is a detention facility. We've looked at other jurisdictions around the country that have opened detention facilities in urban centers and have seen evidence that this does not have to be a negative impact on the neighborhood. So I think that it's certainly important, and as part of considering what a borough-based jail system looks like, to understand that that the evidence and the data would indicate that on, the indicators around quality of life, that there doesn't have to be, a negative impact on a neighborhood. That being said, I think the mayor's office is very committed to wanting to hear what the community and neighborhood concerns are around issues such as heightened density and traffic, and all of the other, issues that have been raised. And, I think that we're hopeful that we don't have to have a zero-sum game where it's a, question of can we have justice reform or can we, address what the neighborhood issues are. And so, our hope is that in continuing to come to these community boards, but also in starting the neighborhood advisory councils and trying to, show up pretty consistently, and figure out other ways to formalize community and neighborhood feedback, both now through the UWIP process and beyond, that we'll be able to address what are the community concerns about this new facility. And we don't dismiss what those concerns
I don't
are.
want to be argumentative, but you have to admit that the situation here is more unique than going out to other states and other cities. We have a very unique situation here, and it's very hard to compare that to outside of this region. And I think that really needs to be looked at really closely because we are very different from other urban areas. We are.
So, I'm gonna have Bob ask a question, but Joseph has, I believe, your colleague, shown up above.
It's actually Julia.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. But hang on, before you tell us about demapping White Street, Bob.
Okay, so it's clear to me that given Rikers Island where it is now, the condition, that logistics can be improved by the 5 more localized centers. But I've often wondered, what's the difference in the quality of justice itself? Is it more fair? If I'm appearing before a judge, is there any difference here? Am I going to be treated as more reasonably or less fairly, or is there a kind of quality in if I'm in prison, if I'm brought in before a judge from there, is it different than this one?
So in terms of the location and access to justice, there is the ability right now. How it works is there are, if people have a court case, they will be woken up at 3 a.m. in the morning, travel in buses to wherever their court, whichever borough their court case is held in. Oftentimes, if there's traffic, if there's some type of the bus breaks down, whatever, a myriad of factors.
So that's logistics.
That's a logistical challenge. In addition, for access to service providers and attorneys, for attorneys to visit their clients on Rikers Island. And I'm sorry, it's logistics, but it's also, there's an impact in
Sure,
terms,
I'm starting to
and in
understand
terms
the
of
quality.
case delay, So if someone misses their court, if someone misses court that day, you can actually,
such a
it
sad
can lead into, negative case processing times overall, which has a system-wide impact in terms of quality of justice. Access to attorneys is also very, very important in terms of people being able to have the most effective legal representation. So certainly that's not to say that defenders and attorneys don't make the trip to Rikers Island, but they'll take an entire day to visit a
So
client.
regardless of the quality of an architectural solution on Rikers Island, it just wouldn't work. It's just too far,
Exactly.
too complex.
Exactly.
And it just isn't
Exactly.
the way, it shouldn't have been set up like that in the first place.
Exactly. Exactly.
Fern, is your question related to that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I guess my question is, do we have any metrics that show how this, how many times the bus breaks down? And what, there should be some kind of detail behind that. That's part of it. And I guess I had another question too. What's gonna happen to Rikers Island after this happens?
So we have no plans for the reuse of Rikers Island other than a clear intention that it is not going to be used for a jail. There are
Transfer.
a number of things that, have been suggested as things that are considered. Obviously the Living Commission had some recommendations that they suggested in the city's report on smaller, safer fare, where we first outlined the plan to close Rikers Island. We suggested that one thing that might be viable would be moving existing city services that don't require a lot of public access, such as fleet storage, fleet repair stations. There are a number of municipal services that are space intensive but don't actually require public access, that's something that could be a viable possibility. So we believe that there will be a public good that can be achieved ultimately. but we don't have any plans for the reuse of Rikers Island, other than a commitment that it is not a jail.
All right, let's hear about White Street,
So,
please.
sorry, I don't, pardon me if I get, you already know a lot of this, but I'll just assume some of you don't. I'll start from the very beginning. The city has a formal city map maintained by respective borough presidents, and it indicates, public right-of-way and things like that. So when you are sort of impeding in that public area, you have to change the city map. For this project, we are doing an overbuild, right, over White Street, connecting the two buildings. So we have to impede on the aerial space on top of the city map. So we have to demap that section of air. I think it's like 50 feet up to maybe 50 feet up and up to the top of the building, that we would be demapping that aerial section. In addition, there's a similar volume under the ground that we would be demapping for a tunnel connecting the two buildings. So that's our sort of demapping application. We will not be demapping the street itself, which is what provides you that certainty that public access is maintained, that it is a public right-of-way, not for us to impede upon without additional process. So the intention is fully to maintain that connection, and the Demapping Act is somewhat administrative, so that we can, the map is sort of heaven to hell, if you will, so that we can take a section under the ground and a section in the air for the project. Does that help? And I think, so the process of demapping is a little bit different, although runs concurrent to the process of ULURP. It is a land use action, but it requires sort of a polling, which is why you guys got a letter earlier. So what happens is the project, tells city planning that they have an intent to demap. But city planning, they're not sure. Let's make sure that everyone knows and everyone can tell city planning what any interest may exist in the street. So what they do is they send a polling letter to DEP, to DOT, to the local community boards, to the borough president, to anyone who could potentially know of something that might be problematic for this particular demapping application. And those folks are given an extra 30 days early on to comment on that particular thing alone, so that by the time city planning puts that land use action into the ULURP package, they know, okay, there isn't some errant DEP infrastructure or a random fire hydrant or a manhole in the middle of nowhere below grade that the project needs to account for, right? So they don't end up demapping something very important. So that's why you guys got that letter earlier than you'll be getting the 60-day comment period for the DEIS and the ULURP actions, right? So I don't know if that clears things up a little bit, but I'm happy to continue answering questions if you have any.
Okay, Tammy, is it specifically on that point?
On that point.
Yeah.
So once you demap the 50 feet up to the top of the building and the underground for the tunnel, does that therefore forever make White Street non-accessible as a through street from that point forward?
No, in fact, it because we're not demapping the roadway itself.
Right.
It makes it that it must be a through street unless an additional action, another demapping is undertaken. So it must be maintained now because it is part of the public right-of-way. We can't obstruct it without an additional action.
And on that same note, there is supposedly a pedestrian plaza around White Street at the moment that's...
It's the idea, yeah.
Yeah, that's all placard parking and not a
Oh, right,
pedestrian
yeah.
plaza. So I want to know how, if any, the demapping affects that airspace that's supposed to be a public plaza and what the process is. And is there any, you said it needs a further ULURP action about that street. Is there anything within the global ULURP process for this that affects that? Like
So-
you're saying it needs another one, but is there another one in the works?
Right. No, another one is not in the works. We have no intention of removing that access. I do believe, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that because we're building parking below grade, we do not intend to provide any parking, I don't believe, public or private, on that street, that it would be a fully pedestrianized passageway. Details of the look to be determined by a designer, but the idea would be access, no cars. Especially because in an overbuilt condition, you don't really want cars, particularly any public cars going under it.
Okay, so with no other questions on the White Street piece of it, and by the way, just in terms of timing of the ULURP, still March 25th certification date. Okay, so our 60-day comment period, and if we have comments on the White Street piece of it, we can do that in that same time period. We'll be starting soon, so I imagine we'll be talking about this at length, even more so in April and certainly May. But I want to give a few members of the public a chance to ask questions on MDC specifically, and I know you had your hand up first, and then I'll recognize you, ma'am, and then you, sir. And if you would, just identify yourself before you speak, because we're recording all of our meetings.
My name is Kun Ya. I'm an urban planning student in Columbia University, and I'm interested in the design of the jail. Like, do you have any precedents, like in America or in other places, other parts of the world, that like they can make a jail in the form of a tower actually work really well in case of its like physical structure? Do you have that kind of precedents that we can follow?
Yeah, so there are other vertical jails across the country. We've also, in some of the actual kind of configuration itself, which are self-contained housing units that have space for outdoor recreation and programming at each housing unit site, are modeled off of different examples in this country, and as close as Westchester, for instance, in terms of the kind of the actual layout of each housing unit block. But, you know, I think we are looking, and the consultant team, the master plan team has been looking at both, you know, what other national models are, and, you know, kind of best practices and thinking in correctional design.
Also, when you're talking about like limit the height, are you talking about enlarge the lot coverage?
No.
We can't
No.
enlarge the lot size.
No, we're talking about whether there's ways that, and we're looking at how to essentially bring down the height using the existing lot.
Okay.
Can you define what you mean by vertical jails?
Hang on, sir. Not going to go out of order. Sir, ma'am, sorry. Go ahead.
The repeated statement that it's hard to get to any island is no longer accurate. The New York City ferry opened its Soundview route August 15, 2018, and it bypasses Rikers Island. From the 90th Street stop in the East River at the foot of Gracie Mansion, takes 10 minutes to get to the gantries on the west side of Rikers Island. It takes another 5 minutes to get to Soundview in the Bronx. The Lippman Commission developed its report parallel to the city and developing the New York City ferry system. But they never spoke to each other. There was never any cross dialogue of what would the impact on Rikers Island be if the New York City ferry system actually connected to Rikers Island. If you can get to Rikers Island in 10 minutes from the foot of Gracie Mansion and 5 minutes from the Bronx, you're already a hub. You're no longer isolated. The descriptions of the desolation of getting there are obsolete. What is needed is a basic new study. You take the New York City ferry system, there are modular units, these barges are made and replicated and placed based on the request of different communities as well as the city. You put a barge stop on the west side of the island, you put one on the east side of the island. There used to be a ferry to Rikers from Queens before the causeway was built. You can add another barge in another location in the Bronx, and all of a sudden, Rikers Island is there, and people can get there, and they'll want to get there, and the mayor can be there twice a week because it won't be inconvenient. It'll be a 10-minute ferry ride. We need to reconceptualize the very basic transportation rationale that it's too hard to get there, and bring the New York City ferry in conjunction with the Lippman Commission report and revision the basic concept of what Rikers Island can be.
Thank you, ma'am. Would you just, do you mind letting us know your name?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My name is Nancy Linde. I'm with Chatham Towers.
Thank you, Nancy.
Please sign in.
All right, so
Yes,
aside
yes.
from that idea, I have a kind of macro.
Just let us know who you are, if you don't mind.
Stephen Freed, I'm an architect for the Chatham Towers, which is at the southern end of the park of
Thank you.
Chinatown. Was pretty active in the, through this process. I have a general procedural question. Maybe the committee has some insight on this. So we'll go through this ULURP process. At the end of the day, the bulk of the building will surely still exceed the allowable zoning, which is an FAR 10. From the old design, that was up to FAR 20. So you would double zoning, and I think you're still double zoning. So in the old days, and maybe it's still true, this would still have to go in front of Board of Standards and Appeals to get the zoning approved, to get this change approved.
Well, this,
So is that still the process,
the board
regardless of the ULIP?
the Board of Standards and Appeals no longer exists.
Yeah, I
I believe it was
figured that,
dissolved
but-
after the charter was
Right.
revised in the 80s, I think.
So what
This
happens
is the new
now?
process. ULURP is actually the process of rezoning this site. The procedure we have to go through is the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, ULURP, which requires us to visit the community boards, city planning commission, borough presidents, and then finally the city council to approve the very change in zoning that you're talking about. In this particular project, we're gonna be doing it with a special permit application as opposed to a rezoning, but it accomplishes the same thing.
But does city planning still sign off on that?
Yes. So the city planning commission, you guys inform, you and the borough president inform the city planning commission's vote, and then the city planning commission's vote informs the city council
Right,
vote.
so that's beyond the ULURP submission, right?
We submit, and then the process is a 7-month process that ends with a city
Right,
council
So
vote.
that's the next step.
Yes.
Carl, and then we're going to wrap up the MDC discussion and move on to our
I'm
second.
just wondering if they could respond to the woman who talked about the ferries.
By the way, Carl Glassman, Tribeca Tree.
Yeah, so I don't think that the ferries solve the challenge
Of
of
course not.
court process of getting people to court. And I just, I will say that it's not just about proximity to the courts, that direct adjacency to the courts means that people are transported directly from the detention center, walked underground, and able to go to their court hearing. And that really makes a significant difference in terms of how much transportation has to happen across the board when we're talking about the difference between a detention center that is directly adjacent to a court facility, and again, there's an underground connection, versus a bus, that can be, an hour and a half away, or versus a ferry ride, or, what other other transportation options.
So you do have metrics then on how often this happened? Because I don't think I heard a direct response in terms of how often the bus breaks down or anything like that. It would be interesting to know how often that happens so that you're gonna move everybody here or to other places.
Yeah, and so I think we're certainly to follow up, follow up and share some information just in terms of kind of what the system-wide challenges of case delays. There's a number of different factors. It's certainly, a very arduous and unpleasant experience as well for, people that
too
are
bad.
waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning and traveling hours to court.
But she's talking about not the effective, she's talking
Certainly
about
understood,
the
and I said that I
frequency.
would follow up and share some additional information.
I know there are a lot of questions. I know you have a follow-up question. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, but I know that maybe you can find each other in the hallway.
Can I just ask where
can do it quickly.
the written analysis of the ferry being extended to Rikers Island is? I have not been able to access that written analysis. Could you please point to me where I can get that study?
So I do not know offhand where there's a written, or that there's a written analysis
Can you
specifically
tell me
of-
why not?
I happy to follow up. I do want to just say that the difference between transporting people directly from a court and to in a detention center versus taking people on a boat, I think is, something that is substantiated. But obviously I'll follow up and see if there's been
But
some
where is it
analysis.
substantiated?
You'd still be talking about a bus to a boat to a bus to a courthouse. So I think the point that Dana is making is that the gains you might get, and by the way, last time, there's not like a tremendous amount of room at the base of Gracie Mansion to stage a bus unloading and loading facility, but just in case, say we could
There's also
solve
not
some of
enough
those.
room here to house 1,500 detainees.
I mean, we are.
We don't have the clout
Okay.
of being at the foot of Gracie
Yeah.
Mansion.
I just want to bring up something that I would feel terrible if you guys weren't caught up to date with some of the research
Can you
that
come on
we've
in?
done. So, thank you, and I'll be as quick as possible. My name is Jan Lee, Chinatown Core Block Association. We've been doing a lot of research that we find, unfortunately, at the Neighborhood Advisory Council Committee, Neighborhood Advisory Committee meetings is lacking, and that is the evidence that either moving the seniors from Chungpak Senior Residence, which is within the complex, or building around them is equally dangerous. And I just want to show people what this looks like, because I think many of you don't understand that here's a proposal of a 500-foot jail. And we have Charles B. Wang Health Center here, and we have the Chungpak Senior Residence with 88 units of senior residence housing low income. We've done an extensive report, which I'm going to submit to your committee, to understand that there is such a thing called relocation stress syndrome that seniors can suffer. It can accelerate their demise. It can cause very, very bad situations in terms of accelerating their dementia. We also have very serious concerns about whether or not airborne silica, diesel fumes, and all of those things that are associated with long and protracted demolitions are going to impact this community. So I know that the city, when they come before you, don't talk about those things, but they are real. And we can speak in abstract terms about whether or not it's dangerous. We can speak in abstract terms about how long this will take. But I submit to your committee our report, which actually has nationwide citations, to have a deeper understanding of what's really in front of us. Keeping them at the location is extraordinarily dangerous and stressful. Moving them is extraordinarily dangerous and stressful. We've heard from Margaret Chin and Gail Brewer. Absolutely, they have drawn the line. We do not want them moved. That's great talking about it today in 2019. As demolition happens, as we know, many of you on this board have understood that it's very hard to predict what's going to happen with a demolition of this scale. What we don't want to have happen is somewhere in between, we have a foundation that's cracked, or we have air that's compromised to the point where we must move these people. We'll be right back in that same position. So I implore you to please accept our data, understand it, and take it into consideration with what's really ahead of us. This is an extraordinary situation that does not exist anywhere else in the other boroughs, in the other situations that we're encountering. So again, this is not about whether or not we agree or disagree with criminal justice reform. This is about the lives of seniors in our community, within your district, and what the city is neglecting to understand. So thank you so much for your time.
All right, Jen, thank you, and you're going to get the last word. We are going to move on to the second item on our agenda, and we'll just take like a 2-second break while folks shuffle out of the rooms. I know we're packed in, and I know we've got a lot of folks out in the hall for 2:50. Thanks to the folks from
So if you go to work, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, that's okay. But if you're detained
It's a little tight.
or a felony or misdemeanor and get up at 4 o'clock, it's not okay. I mean, that's her argument. Every single week she says the same thing about getting up at 4 o'clock in the
Guess
morning.
what? If you work
I get up 4 o'clock in the morning every day.
If you work in a hotel in Manhattan and live at the end of Queens, you're up at 4 a.m. to get up. So,
The inconvenience of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning? Seriously?
For the folks in the hall who are here on 250 Water Street, there's a few seats that have opened up if you want to come on in.
Push the quote-unquote desire. The mayor's desire.
Come on, Matt, don't be shy.
That's what it's all about.
Patrick, nice to meet you.
I don't know where I should sign because I don't know. Just sign it, because I didn't want to,
What's your name?
turns out it's
Danielle?
because they're going to take it to the airport. And I'm going to all the proposals.
Are you under
that are out there.
CB1
The number one
liaison?
spread out today. I understand.
Go ahead. I was just thinking that would be a good place to do whatever, so that's
No, because notice they didn't close the door on that. I didn't say that. Because that would be and it fixes
too bad our boundary wasn't drawn about 3 blocks further south. We wouldn't have this. It really does belong in Ward 3.
is like
And where? Ward 3, because most of the impacted people are from Chatham and from Chinatown.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not minimizing it, but
Yeah.
it seems like an effort in futility.
Yeah. No matter what you say, it doesn't matter.
We should tell her not to come.
Yeah, you should definitely disinvite her. We don't-
Yeah, we should say we'd rather.
She's so smart. Well, they have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, yeah, but they beat somebody over the head with this. That's okay.
I'm so sorry you murdered 4 people, but we gotta wake you up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
And you know what, in the Army, you get up at 4 o'clock too.
Look, I really think it's a land grab to take Rikers and turn it into an extension of LaGuardia.
Well,
Extension of LaGuardia?
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. How can you fix LaGuardia? By adding more land. The only land near LaGuardia you get.
How far is that from LaGuardia?
All right, guys, we're going to get going on to the next item. Alice, you want to come back in? This is right up your alley. Alice is the chair of our environmental committee. She's also on the land use committee.
So this is 250?
this is too.
Will we be done by the halftime of the Nets game? Just check.
I don't know.
Halftime of which game?
Nets, my
All
daughter's
right.
performing.
The next item is a report. Really what it is an update from me and Diana on a call that we had. I say we, there's a few of us from CB1, some leadership of various committees, including environmental and including land use, to get a sense from the DEC themselves as to what this program is all about, what the benefits and liabilities, for lack of a better term, are. And so we're here just to report that information. There's no debate, there's no resolution on the point, but certainly I'm sure folks are going to have questions and comments that they want to make, so we'll do that. But let me give you the headlines and highlights from the call. The 250 Water Street application comment period is extended from 30 days to 60 days and ended what is now on March 6th of 2019. DEC received over 100 letters and emails. They characterized it as something with a high level of interest. So if you're among the folks who are calling and writing and emailing DEC on that, congratulations, they did hear you. And they commented that they heard you. The decision to whether or not to accept the application has not yet occurred. But assuming the application moves forward, there's 3 stops, and I'm just going to read these notes verbatim because it's well written, and these are Anthony's notes, quite frankly. First step will be a remediation investigation. This is where there's a detailed analysis of the site, the conditions and the toxins or the contaminants. There will be full air monitoring implemented and a safety plan which is presented for the public to review and comment. Then it goes into a remediation work plan stage. This is where the applicant and DEC develop and submit a detailed plan and schedule for any remediation. No development can take place during this period, and it has a 45-day comment period. At the end of that, there's a certificate of completion that includes environmental easements, but obviously in there will come the remediation in and of itself. The benefits of participating in the program, there's really two. One is tax credits that the applicant can get by voluntarily participating in the program. The tax benefits, DEC was frankly a little hesitant to talk about and wanted to refer us to tax experts. But at a high level, they let us know that up to 10% of the cost of remediation, the applicant can get a tax credit for. That can be split up in a number of ways depending on what they do on the site. For example, they can get up to a 5% of that credit can be, if they allocate affordable units, they can get up to a 5% tax credit specifically for that. A lot of questions have been asked about why the state program, why not a city program? What we were told is that there's a memorandum of understanding between the city's Office of Environmental Remediation, or what you'll hear referred to as OER, that above a certain level of oversight on any development, the DEC is really the party that controls. Now, it's our understanding that this site, because there's no zoning action yet that is taking place at the site, it can be, and it presumably can be developed as it stands right now, that it's not eligible for what's known as an E designation, and that's something that's overseen by the city. So that is why the applicant presumably has chosen to volunteer for the state program. And that's the last point. The Brownfields Cleanup Program is voluntary, and the applicant, which in this case you all know is Howard Hughes Corporation, or an LLC thereof, doesn't have to submit to the program because of their current zoning. They could develop it as of right, and as I mentioned, wouldn't qualify for an E designation. And I'm going to credit Wendy Chapman for her notes from the call as well. Wendy, I'm just citing from some of your notes if you don't mind. They were helpful. Cleanup would start anywhere in a year to 18 months. I think that's important for the public to know. DEC believes that this site and all brownfield sites can be cleaned up safely with the right plan, including toxins like mercury, which I understand is one of the particular concerns of the community. Excavation of the site or any remediation would require a building foundation plan from the applicant to show how deep the cleanup would be. And in a perfect world, DEC would like to see them go all the way down to bedrock to clean it up, but that may not be achievable here. They may not know that until they start getting into the site planning and the remediation planning stages. We were told that building the foundation could start in approximately 2 years, just as a theoretical matter, but that's DEC talking. They don't know anything about what may or may not be planned exactly for the property just yet. And as I mentioned again, it could be developed as of right, so it's not eligible for an E designation. Diana, did I miss anything?
Yes.
Could you define what E designation means?
Sure.
You missed the...
E designation, according to the Office of Environmental Remediation, means that as a consequence of a zoning action, a property has environmental requirements relating to air, noise, or hazardous materials that must be investigated and addressed before an owner can obtain a building permit for the property's development. So if it's as a consequence of a zoning action, which as it currently stands, this site is not, so it isn't eligible.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if they use the state program, excuse me, they're no longer liable for anything that may happen.
Thank you. That is actually the
You're
other
welcome.
major benefit for
Not
an
only
applicant.
to them, but also their surrounding
Yes.
sites. It relieves them of the liability
It
of their
relieves,
surrounding.
well, if it's shown, this is what we were told on the call, if it's shown that any of the toxins at the site have seeped into
Water,
the
soil.
neighboring properties, that's on the state to clean that up, and the state has an obligation, a legal requirement to actually do that and to make sure that that is done correctly. Yes, the applicant then, as far as its liability for that seepage from the site goes, they would get a release of liability, but the state would, in a look-back period, try to go back and find prior owners of the site who would have long-tail insurance coverage presumably in place that might end up paying for some of that. But that's just really a money game at the end of the day. Yes, Wendy, you want to add something?
So first I want to thank Alice for initiating the idea to set up this call, and the folks that we're talking to, I believe, were in Albany. Is that correct? I mean, they weren't in New York City because they were state folks, and I really appreciated. We tried to ask them many times. We're like, listen, this is a, I've been to a few meetings already. There are hundreds of people that are showing up for this, and that I think that we need to hear directly from the people that oversee it. So this call was incredibly helpful for me because it really did separate the idea that it can't be run by the city, which earlier meetings I've been gone to, I think it was unclear whether it could be run by the city or run by the state. And because of the scale of it, it sounds like it can only be in the state's hands. But I want to say that we really want to invite them back. I think that we need to have public hear more directly from folks that are running this program. It is complicated. The one thing I appreciated from them is they said it's a voluntary program that Howard Hughes doesn't have to participate in, which you stated, but that the public comments and the public input period, there are many at many different stages, and that was a big part of their call. And I said, well, listen, the public will also, one of the things we said on the call is the public would like to hear from you directly. So I just wanted to state that openly, that we are as concerned as anyone. I mean, I hear mercury, and I have never heard any safe levels of mercury. So, the idea that this can be removed, I wrote a letter personally saying, what happens if Hurricane Sandy hits in the middle of your halfway point? What are you going to do? This is, I went to a meeting this morning. It is in the 100-year flood zone, and as we know, we don't have any sort of protection by the Brooklyn Bridge. So I think that this is one of those things that I appreciated the people on the call. They took our call very seriously. They definitely said that the public has a big input, but I'm hoping that we can hear more directly from the people who know the most. So I don't know if there's other
Thanks. That's helpful.
Thanks.
Wendy?
Thank you.
Okay, I
Sorry,
have just a couple process kind of questions that I don't know. So if I understand correctly, because this is not a zoning issue and it's an as of right, it doesn't qualify for that. But there are air rights that they have purchased from other places, which can become a zoning question, that they can come back to us for that, correct?
Presumably.
Presumably. So, cart before horse kind of a conversation, since we have no idea what their plans are. There's no master plan, as we've known for decades at this point. They could be doing the brownfield site and then coming back for zoning changes, ostensibly, as a possibility for a process.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, I'm not off in my understanding of timing. So,
Just following up, I mean, that indeed is one of the concerns that has been stated again and again by members of the community at these public meetings that have been mentioned, that have attracted huge crowds of concerned people, parents from the schools, residents from the neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. So that everyone is saying, why don't we have information about what is to be developed on the site? I know Howard Hughes continues to appear at meetings of this body and say there are no plans and they don't know what is happening. Now, having heard that many times, I can also report that we've gotten many, many reports from many entities that have sat with Howard Hughes and have been given much more detailed information about what exactly is being planned for the site, including large-scale buildings on the site. So it seems to a lot of people that they are intentionally trying to not provide this information. They've been trying to sort of never give the community a master plan. Roger, who chairs our landmarks committee, has for years asked for a master plan. The community board has asked for it. We've never gotten it.
They deflect that all the time.
And it works to their advantage to not provide that kind of information. And perhaps it's time for this committee to go on record saying we would like and we insist that we get a full explanation, and that the position of many people in the community, and I think most people, I think it's the overwhelming consensus, was that unless they reveal their plans for the site, there should be no approval of any excavation of the site. And there's also some logic to that if you think it through. I mean, if you're building an as-of-right 12-story building, I would venture to say that the piles that you have to install in the ground are not quite as intrusive as the ones that you would need for a skyscraper. So these will all factor into how, you know, they're going to manage the subspace, the space below ground.
So let's put it back on the agenda for next month and consider a resolution along that lines. I think that's fair and appropriate.
I wanted to add to that because it was something that, oh,
That's
sorry.
Sound right?
Or maybe we could do it tonight.
I was gonna say, well,
I
can't
mean,
we do it
is there any
tonight?
reason not to do it
We
tonight?
didn't agenda it for any kind of resolution, but.
But it's a discussion and a report, there's no reason that it couldn't result in that.
Sure.
So, in that case, I would put on the table a motion to insist that Howard Hughes and DEC not proceed with the brownfield application until it's revealed to the community what is planned to be built on the site.
Okay, wait. Proceed.
Second.
You want to add anything to that?
Okay,
I mean, possibly,
No, I think it's
there
sweet.
might be
Wait, hold
some
on.
other
I
issues
write fast, but not that fast.
to raise, but let's start with this, and
I have one other.
Was it
Comprehensive or master plan, what did you say, Paul?
Paul, was it second?
I
Yes, it was
believe it was
seconded.
seconded by.
Wait.
Okay, no, I'm
I'm
trying,
trying to get your word back. Comprehensive or master plan, you put it really nicely, I'm just trying to
oh,
catch it quickly.
you may have to go to the videotape,
right,
because, audio tape, I don't recall exactly
What
what
did
I
you
said.
say?
But I basically said, a plan, a master plan for the site that reveals what is planned to be built there before DEC or Howard Hughes proceeds with any
Plans for brown.
any brownfield excavation plans. And,
Police.
and believe me, I don't want to speak for anyone, but you have representatives of the school who we've met with, and they are the most adamant about this than anyone. And there were, you know, okay, let's discuss this, and then I might have some other issue to
Okay,
raise
so
later.
just to be clear in excuse me, in the context that we're now in, now we're debating an actual motion for a resolution. So comments on the original report on the call, let's come back to that once we've sifted through this. I'm gonna go Luis and Michael. Colin, did you have your hand up?
Just
Wait,
a point of
I'm just calling out the order.
clarification, that's all, yeah.
Go around.
So I kind of have
I
a dumb
didn't mean to
question.
at some point.
So they could build a 12-story building as of right,
120
and
feet.
let's say they only have to go, to remediate the land for that 12-story building, they only go halfway down. If they subsequently decide they get approval for a bigger building, in theory, they would have to go back and mediate again, right? It wouldn't just be.
Well, I
they
don't
would
know,
have to-
if DEC,
No.
it's according to
Why not?
DEC's policies,
Why
we
not?
don't know.
Because if they do the brownfield
It goes.
remediation and they clear the site to whatever maximum possible level is
Which is
allowed
12
there.
stories.
No.
Two bedrock is
That's
what
what-
they're,
To bedrock
is what they
has
would
nothing,
want.
the brownfield site has no saying on what they build there, because they've said there's no plans. It's about a cleanup through to bedfill, to
Well,
bedrock,
actually, they
right?
have to submit
That was-
they
or-
have to submit
they're
their
helpful.
foundation plans as part of the brownfield cleanup site. So
And
that
that's-
will
that's-
reveal how
That's my
extensive
question.
the base. So on the call, they said they have to talk about what their plans are for the land, the base. So that will reveal things in terms of how deep. And the one thing that they said is really they don't know at this point where bedrock is in this area, because a lot of it is so old and it's fill. But in normal brownfield sites, and oh, by the way, we got a link that you can get off the state, their brownfield sites all over the city. And, you know, I don't think I was aware of how many there were, there are a lot. But their plans are always to take it down to bedrock and to remove all contaminants, whatever they are. So for that lot, that's part of the,
Right, but the key is,
that's the state's, that is the state's brownfield program. And the one thing that they were telling us is there are a lot of protocols in place, and they want to remove everything down to bedrock if it is possible. And they said on the call that this site has not been surveyed yet, so they don't know that it is possible.
Okay, Michael, then Colin, then Alice, and I don't know if Tammy's still.
I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to Paul's resolution, that they be approved plans before they can be approved in the DEC application system. Logic behind that obviously is whether or not they're going to work within the rules, or they're going to try to change the rules, and that obviously influences what gets built, when it gets built, as well. You know, some of our fears are things like, you know, a big hole, and you know, you look at the Con Ed site, that's 38th, 39th, 40th, right below the UN off the East River. It's been a big hole for 14 years or something like that. So there is precedent, and Howard Hughes also has precedent where they have what they call a zombie shopping mall somewhere in the Midwest or something, where they walked away from a project when it was half done or partially done or something like that. So that's really one of the most important parts of it, is that they go through the whole city process before the state gets involved with that. And that was one of the reasons why we thought it was important to keep it on a city level, because they have to deal with so many different city agencies here that you don't want to be ping-ponging back and forth. The next part of it is just this whole idea of where should the state spend their money, and this is something that I guess the community board can opine about, because if they were to assume the future liability, it could be millions of dollars if something happened, or a class action or whatever. And there have been reports that have been done about the DEC program that say the state is taking on too much liability. Right. $3.3 billion in liability, and now we're adding to that because this is the middle of downtown Manhattan, and you know, everything's more expensive. Another part of this is that the brownfield program is supposed to stimulate economically depressed areas and you know, get jobs. And what's happening is 55% of their money is going into Manhattan right now. So you know, Utica and all over the state, they don't have the money because it's all being used by developers in Manhattan. And you're perfectly right, there are any number of brownfields in Manhattan. So, you know, some of it is philosophical, some of it is corporate welfare, that money is going not only for remediation, but money can be used to redevelop. And then they use the word affordable. And of course, the application has three parts. You can say we're doing affordable, you can say we're not doing affordable, you can say we're not really sure at this moment in time. Which one do you think they picked? So the point we're trying to make is that we really need to force them to show their cards and go through the whole city process and really better understand why they decided to walk into this mess, because the Milstein site has been, you know, no one has succeeded on the Milstein site in 40, 50 years, and why they come in and they think that they can do it now is an interesting question. And we also have to remember that this is a contingency deal. If they can't build what they want to build, it goes back to Milstein. And Milstein is really the problem here. I mean, Milstein is getting a windfall for what they paid for it, obviously. But they're also getting somebody who's fighting the good battle for them to try to build something, to build a super tall or something like that. And so we have to get back to, you know, the real context here, which is that the community is not being involved, the city agencies would not be involved. Once you start digging a hole, there's an inevitability that you want something to be built there. What's going to happen to 400 cars in the parking lot? There's so many different parts of this. What's going to happen with Seaport City and sustainability? It's premature for them to enter the program because of the incremental method in which they do their planning, they do their presentations, This has happened for 9, 10 years now. We have been watching it happen. 200 people on the rooftop at Pier 17 became 4,000 people on the rooftop of 17. So I would very much encourage the community board to use the word approved plans. And if that makes it harder, it makes it harder. But at least get into the system. And no one is saying that you shouldn't develop on that site. The only thing we're saying is play by the rules.
Okay, on that point, how do we feel, folks?
I think
I'd
that does
second
make
that.
sense. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense
Okay.
because we want to know what's going to be built there in order to properly clean it.
Okay, Colin, then Alex, then Bob.
I actually feel glad that I'm asking this question because I thought I would feel like it had to be really comprehensively kind of spelled it out. I was going to ask, if Millstein wasn't successful over 10 years, why does Hughes, and do we think Hughes has any chance of being successful now? But you've asked that, so I guess we don't have an answer.
Okay,
Well,
Alex,
because they're going around the community offering give-backs to every group they
But
can.
they still need to sue to override the height restriction, right?
No, they
No.
need to
Yeah.
go through a land use process, just like the jail has to revise the zoning. It would be very complicated, and then they would have to subsequently get approved by the Landmarks Commission, which has never approved a building more than a short building on
Right.
that site.
Oh, sorry, right.
And they've turned down building after building that the Millsteins proposed that were high-rise, so. And let me just point out, it's important for this board to understand a little bit more of the history, and I don't want to go on and on, but I'll just go on for 2 minutes. Again, 1977, a 10-block historic district was created in the Seaport. And they did a survey, and there were 91 buildings there, and they averaged 4 to 5 stories in height, and that was what Landmark said was unique about this area. To preserve it, it stood out in dramatic contrast to the high-rise buildings in the rest of Lower Manhattan. So there was consensus, obviously, to create the historic district. That was 1977. The Millsteins bought the site a few years after that. They tried again and again, even though this site is within the historic district. That's an important point not to lose sight of. It's not just an ordinary development site. This board has a policy, it's not a policy, but we've frequently negotiated with developers on normal sites to get trade-offs for the community. I think this is an unusual, different situation. And let me go a little further. After having had building after building turned down by Landmarks, what happened was this community board, working with city planning, sponsored a downzoning resolution. So we were the sponsor, Community Board 1, working in conjunction with city planning. I could share all the paperwork with anyone who wants to see it. And this was the plan that won the support, not just of the NIMBYs in the neighborhood who didn't want a tall building. It was supported by the developer that EDC designated for the Front Street block, Frank Siami. He testified in favor. It was testified in favor by Carl Weisbrod, who's a well-known major player in planning and development, and he was at the time the head of the Downtown Alliance, which represents property owners. He testified in favor of it. All the elected officials did, the Municipal Arts Society, all the historic district groups, all the preservation groups, a ton of people in the neighborhood. City planning was in favor of this, and the only opponents to the rezoning were the Millstein organization. They had 2 reps, and the Real Estate Board of New York. That was it. That was the entire opposition. Everyone else in the city, including all those players, said this was the right thing to do. This is ridiculous to have this zoning and this landmark designation that are in conflict. Let's put a zoning in place that makes sense. And the zoning allows for a taller building than any building in the Seaport. The tallest building now is 96 feet in height. This would allow for 120 feet. So it's not as though, this is something crazy that was proposed here. So I just think the board should understand that we were the ones who fought very hard. It's very unusual for a community board to sponsor a ULURP. We had to raise $90,000 to do this and hire private consultants to get it done. it was not an easy undertaking, but again, we had a lot of partners in it. So I just think it's maybe another thing that we should reinforce in this committee is that we, and again, in discussions with the broader community, we've gotten overwhelming support that people say, yes, we support development of the site, but it should be in conjunction with what's zoned there. And if we go on record saying that, maybe we would make them think twice about what they're trying to do.
I think it'd be nice also to reference back to the 2003 resolution, a little bit of that history.
That
Alice?
community board won unanimously approved.
Oh,
by the way.
It's on their site, it's on the, I forget what site, that community
we'll find-
board did it.
We could probably post
we'll-
it, Diane, you
We'll
can
get that.
post it on
I
our
have it at
website.
home, the resolution actually.
Yeah, I think it.
And one of the things we were
Wait,
lucky.
hang on, hang on.
Okay.
Alice has
I
been
just-
waiting
one
patiently.
sentence, One sentence. One of the things we were lucky about. Okay. Forget it.
You'll get a chance, just relax.
No, I wanted to, one of the things I wanted to bring up at the executive committee on Wednesday, and unfortunately I don't think I can go, was the idea, and maybe this is, I don't know if it's germane to this committee's work, but one of the things that's so apparent to me for many years now being on this board, not that many, but a few, is that we're always in a position of reaction, not proactivity. In other words, it's always, we're given something to review. And I really believe that at this point, it would be probably a really great idea for this community and our community board to consider actually putting forth a zoning plan. In other words, working with a planning consultant and having someone actually provide a plan of the area, particularly 250 Water Street, that reviews exactly what can and can't be built there, in addition to the new market site. You know, you see this happening on Community Board 8, for example, at the Holmes Tower site, at the NYCHA development, where towers are being planned for public space in NYCHA. And it's an incredibly effective tool to see zoning diagrams of what can and can't be built there, and really working from a position of strength where you know visually, physically, a plan is existing of what can and can't go to these places. We're often just sort of pointing to things that we never see an overall plan, and I know that there are, I mean, it would mean trying to raise money to get a planning consultant to do this, but I think it might be something which you're talking about years ago, not raising 90,000, I don't think it would cost anywhere near that, but I just think we're always not working with a plan, our own plan. And so it's just something that I thought would be an idea to consider, is working with a planning consultant specifically on that site to identify what can and can't be done, and the whole of the area. You know, it's not just 250, it's New Market, it's that whole area. Something visual, something that's working with a planner who really could talk to us about what can and can't be built in terms of zoning, and showing diagrams of that. I don't know if that's something that anyone would think is valuable,
Just
but.
to clarify, the rezoning affected the entire 10-block historic district. It wasn't a spot zoning effort of just 250 Water.
We have the money.
Everything was rezoned.
I just think the whole, our board is constantly dealing with that, any kind of real understanding of zoning, of the visual impacts of these things, and it seems like something that would be helpful to us, and also to work with the developers so we know what we're talking about. We're not just given a plan, but we were actually participating in the planning of that plan with actual diagrams and such. I mean, it's coming from an architect, but it's just a thought that I see.
It's a nice idea. I don't know.
I actually think that's a great idea, because one of the comments that came up even on our earlier topic of discussion was the scope and scale of MDC and what the FARs are on there, and what they were and where they were approved and what needs to be done. Those kinds of conversations would be significantly easier, just even looking forward for everybody on the board, not only in the land use, but when we go to a full board meeting and you have a lot of that kind of back and forth conversation, that would be really very, very helpful to have, because what we've seen, even in my tenure on the board, the substantial amount of growth is not only in the renovation of the office buildings, but going up further, and there's no reason to think that what happened at Two Bridges can't be happening anywhere downtown. It's very, very possible that out of scope, out of scale, because that's the new style. I mean, when you take a look at what Pier 17 was shown to us in the beginning, and what was told to where we are today, it's been a long, terrible walk. And I'd like to see, especially from what Alice is saying, just be able to educate the board itself better.
Bob, you were next. Do you mind if Joe gives his one sentence
No,
first?
that's okay. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay.
Okay, well, my concern is about the obligation of community boards to actually represent the community. So where this started for me is we had an environmental protection meeting when this got uncapped, and we got to experience the direct concern of the parents about the safety of their children. And they were very, very concerned about, they heard the word mercury, they heard the idea that mercury is in even in the least presence extremely dangerous. So this our meeting uncorked a significant concern in the community, which actually is raw fear. So we have a certain kind of obligation to settle that and make sure that for example, Wendy's concerned that if you have a storm condition and a big hole with mercury in it, that isn't going to produce a health disaster for adults or children. So I think that we really should, maybe in the resolution even, express some concern about assuring people in the community that any process that gets engaged in and approved is a safe one and will not compromise the well-being of the children in the long run, or even any of us get sick on account of it.
And I should just say that on the call, since I lived through 9/11 and, Christy Todd Whitman's, statement that the air was safe.
Yeah.
So,
Remember that well.
and those air monitors were literally across the street from my house. So, because I was the dividing line between, right at Chambers Street. One of the things I said on the call to the state folks is that you have to understand the sensitivity to those of us who have lived through this, and air monitoring, which is one of the things that they really stressed, that they do a ton of air monitoring, and I appreciated that. I really liked hearing about the public process and how many times the public, and they would take daily air monitor readings. I said, that alone, just hearing that there's air monitor readings will trigger many of us. So I was saying, there needs to be a lot more communication with our community, because our community has gone through things that other communities haven't gone through. So that was expressed on the call as well. So
there really needs to be an assurance that what gets engaged in here is really completely safe, because I don't want to even myself go walking into one of those holes while they're working on it, and even myself being exposed. It's really dangerous. And one experience I had with the 9/11 thing was masks just weren't sufficient. And all these, I'm very involved with the health aspects of this, and I'm on those kinds of committees. A lot of people are very sick because we didn't take the right precautions in the first place.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I learned in all this is there's no going back. Once you get the exposure, you can't take it back from yourself or anybody.
Right. All right, let's work it in. So Joe's been waiting very patiently. And then we're gonna go to Richard, and Colin's gonna go for a second bite.
Joe, you're up.
Joe, you're up.
Oh,
Well played.
Did you forget?
I think we were helped. I was on the board in those days, and I think we were helped with two things. Before Sciami came, there was another corporation, a Metropolitan Housing or something, and they had title to build on the properties. And they wanted to go higher because they said they couldn't make money and they couldn't do this and that. Finally, we got them thrown out, and Sciami built well. And also the Milsteins were having a fight, a family feud. So they couldn't put their energy on anything having to do with that rezoning.
Can I just say,
Wait. You'll come up after Colin.
He answered my second bite.
Okay.
I was just curious if the city ever considered acquiring a property.
condemning the property?
Yes, eminent domain.
I don't think seriously it was ever considered.
But it was in that legal case that we found that.
There
as a
was a
threat.
third water tunnel connection that was needed back in the early 1990s. I don't remember the exact date. but, and I think they were considering utilizing part of that site to connect the water tunnel and therefore build some kind of park space so that they could have access to it, but they ultimately decided against that.
So the condemnation was not about an environmental concern?
Not to my knowledge.
Sorry, I just was always
I
curious
mentioned
about
Colin
that.
and then I went on to turn. Richard, you go.
So in the light of this conversation and these comments, which I think are very enlightening and very convincing to me, I'd like to propose different language that's an add-on to what was suggested before.
Different or additional?
The way I might phrase it would be, Community Board 1 will not support consideration of the brownfield application without an approved development plan for the 250 Water Street site. Further, CB1 resolves to reiterate its commitment to the landmark and zoning provisions of the Seaport Historic District.
I
think
actually
that puts
have
everything-
alternate wording for that second sentiment, if I could get that in at some point.
Well, wait, and this is my reaction initially
I'm all
to
for-
say CB1 will not support consideration of. We're not being asked to support consideration of entry into the brownfield program. I thought originally the way that you put it was a little bit more. This is just my opinion, a little bit more effective in terms of we're saying you shouldn't go into that and without.
Right, I said no plan should be approved until there are approved plans for the site, basically. That was the gist of it.
Okay, so do we will not support consideration for it? And I didn't get it all, but I'll follow up with it.
So what's your verbiage?
I like the second.
Paul, what's your verbiage?
All right, I have a second, be it resolved.
Okay, so wait, on the first part.
Okay.
Are we good with Richard's language?
The reason I phrased it that way was the way I read it, the way I heard your original language. It sounded like we would agree to it once there was an approved plan, and I'm not so sure we're prepared to say that yet. That's why I rephrased it this particular
Well,
way.
maybe
So
we
it's
should
a
just
nuance.
say
I certainly
no
accept that.
I think it needs to be neutral. I think the beginning part needs to be neutral, and then I think it's with all of the conditions that are very clear, because there's a lot of hurdles.
There's a lot of hurdles, yes.
So
So
I-
how do you make it neutral?
So,
Let's see
I
what
think
Paul
when
says.
Paul's start was a little more neutral.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
And that was, just reread that
well,
again?
why don't you read what you had?
The start of it would be that the applicant, or I guess in this case, because it's not an applicant for us, that they not proceed with the brownfields application until there is a comprehensive or master plan, and that's going to have approved plans that reveals what is planned to be put there. Obviously, we'll clean that up, make it sound better, but I think the point being, it's the not proceed with the brownfields application until.
And we
X, Y,
should
and
make
Z.
it clear that we want neither DEC nor Howard Hughes to proceed with this application until. So it has to be both of them that we ask for this.
What's yours?
And that's important because we can then forward that along to our state elected officials and ask for their
And
support.
make sure you
in
get
that
the
regard.
LLC name correct. It's not under Howard Hughes.
Right.
Okay, do you want to hear the
Yeah,
other
so
one
for
now?
this second one, Richard, thank you for bringing that up.
Okay,
Yeah.
ready? Okay, so I wrote down, CB1 strongly believes that the site should only be developed in compliance with the C62A zoning with 120-foot height limit that was universally agreed to in 2003 for the South Street Seaport Historic District. And we could throw in there, that was sponsored by CB1 and universally agreed to.
What
would.
about the
The more
landmarks part of
organizations,
that?
the better.
What's that?
What about the landmarks part of that issue as well? You mentioned zoning. Is it worth putting something about landmarks in
Because
there too?
landmarks wouldn't approve anything over 102.
No, I don't think we need to ask. We're really talking about a zoning matter here, so landmarks has no impact on this particular aspect.
I guess my reaction to that is that there's no application for anything that would be bigger at this point, and are we sort of presuming a position without being asked for a position.
Well, again,
We're
we've
being
heard.
Because I don't like to
We've
prejudge an
heard-
application before it
and
comes
so-
in, I don't think
All
that's fair
right,
for
can
our
I be
committee to
very
do that.
blunt?
Yeah.
Elected officials have reported back to me that they sat with Howard Hughes and were told very specifically that they had buildings of way taller than 120 feet that they mentioned to them. So is that sufficient? I mean, should we just be sticking our heads in the sand and
I'm not
acting?
saying that, I'm just don't, just as a,
I
Be
think that in this
proactive.
case, I think this case is not like every other case. And, you know, I think that all of us understand that this is a complicated, multi-year, multi-strategy plan. And, oh, by the way, it may, with all of the hurdles, be something great at the end of the day. And I would be the first one to say, you know, I don't think it's just we can't do anything. But I think that there needs to be something that I would like to feel like the community is a part of this something. If it turns out to be really good that we're getting rid of mercury, and that it's really good that we're getting some goodies from, that will help the neighborhood, or whatever.
Suggesting that that should not proceed.
I was gonna say,
Right,
I'm not
exactly.
suggesting, what I'm saying is that I think that I would like to be treated like part of the plan. And I think the community feels like this is complicated. And the same thing is, you know, on other conversations that we're having on resiliency. I'm like, don't hide the ball. This is what I keep telling them. Don't hide the ball. Just put it out there. We understand nobody's gonna like everything, but I think that we need to say, we're worried about this. We like this. You know, this needs to slow down and get more community input. And the history of the Seaport area and the Pier 17, we can have a new relationship going forward. It doesn't have to be the way it was.
They're gonna change their stripes for us.
But people have
Oh,
changed,
it's all about the
personnel has
money.
changed, and this is a
all about the money.
chance
Of course.
to say, we would like to be very engaged and proactive and see what happens.
Follow the money.
I think you can be that. I'm just concerned about, and this is just me speaking, I mean, the committee will come up with the resolutions the committee wishes, but I think it's just unfair to say that we're gonna prejudge an application, and I know you're saying that in this situation, maybe it's different, by saying that we believe the site should be developed only at a particular size or height, et cetera, when
But we're
no
not,
one's
we're just
asked.
saying it
No, that's
has-
exactly what he said.
But it's the same height and size that this board went on record unanimously for, so do you
But that's a
discount that?
No, I'm saying that's
So
a different way,
why
that's a
can't
totally
we
different.
just reinforce our resolution?
That's fine, but that's not what I'm
And
hearing out of
maybe
this.
the answer is, with, you know, we
Something
hope
nice
you
and keep
continue
our
to
mouth.
engage with our community. I mean, I think that's the idea.
And we're not saying that, the city and the historical
Wait, okay.
commission are saying that.
Tammy,
Okay,
Let other
I
people
started
speak.
this roll down the hill.
Go ahead.
Okay, and the reason why I started the roll down the hill is because there is no master plan. We really don't know what's happening. I don't know, maybe they have the most altruistic purposes to clean the site, and this will be wonderful. Maybe we find out that there's a zoning application right after the cleanup's done. And how will, right, that they have not said anything, so there's a possibility for all of it. But if they would just come clean, to be upfront with the community, then you can prepare. It's like saying to somebody, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to stand outside. By the way, there's a tornado coming, shh. I mean, this is ridiculous. We need, if you don't like the way it says there, then we need to just be on record saying, we want anything that's done with this site to be in compliance with what we've already said. And we don't know what this is going to be, but we want to know before we say we agree to a brownfill site, because there are other possibilities. But since we know nothing, they're not telling us anything, this is not where we want to go.
And to my ear, that's very different than saying it should only be developed at such and such a height. It's different even in my ear to say that, to reaffirm the 2003 resolution. I think that's fine, that doesn't prejudge an application.
I
Again,
see that
I
if you
realize
go
I'm
back
ignoring this
through,
point, but
if you note it to the resolution from then, and you say in compliance with, and leave it at the zoning, and just leave it at the zoning, then that's that. They know what the zoning is, they're not idiots, nobody in this plan
All
doesn't
right,
know the
I
information.
revised my language slightly. Ready?
Okay, number what?
CB1 is clearly, be it further resolved, that CB1 is clearly on record stating that this site should only be developed in compliance with the C62A zoning with
What else was that?
120-foot height limit. I'll give it to you.
Okay.
That was universally agreed to in 2003 for the South Street Seaport. That was proposed by the CV1 and city planning. So I'm
That
just saying,
resolves my
it's
concern.
clearly on record stating.
That
So-
resolves my concern.
All right, and that's
So
perfect,
I'm
because
willing to go along with your change.
It may not be in this resolution, but I find like, again, we're very much piecemealing these conditions that we find in downtown. 250 Water Street is absolutely kind of part of a bigger parcel, as we know, and it's going to look at the air rights at Market Street and all of it. Is there some way to build into this an allowance for seeing the basic overall plan of HHC-owned properties in that area? I mean, you're not gonna see 250 Water Street without what they're thinking about doing on Market Street, the Market Street side. So I don't know if there's some way to, I think we're concentrating on this one portion, but, you know, it's all the.
Well, the language
Because
says master plan.
It does say, it does
it
have a
says master
okay.
plan, and I
Okay.
think I think the only other thing
Well,
that
I
I'd
would
wanna reference in
identify,
there.
it's not just 250 Water Street.
Right. Master plan, I mean, do we say anywhere in there establish the historic Seaport District? Cause that's,
To respect.
Master plan of the historic
Respect the
Seaport District, is
Yeah.
that what it says?
because that's kinda, then I'd be happy as
Because I just think we're gonna, for your reasons,
It doesn't have to
exactly.
if it's in the zoning
I
code.
didn't hear what
The
you
only other part of this is, of course, the museum. And we're really nervous that the museum is being held hostage to whatever the air rights deal would be. And maybe not in this resolution, maybe in some other forum, you know, we want that museum lease to be renegotiated with the city. I mean, back in August, de Blasio said it was just about a done deal, and it still hasn't
You
happened.
can't include this in
So,
the
We want to get
resolution.
it off the
You're gonna
table.
muddy
so
the
But
it's
resolution.
that should be a separate
Yeah,
resolution
yeah.
specifically.
You're gonna muddy
Just
this
wanted to bring
resolution.
everybody's attention.
That would be great, I don't know whether that goes under arts or that goes under land use, but that should be something that's specifically targeted, cause we've done Seaport Museum resos, supporting them and urging them, and, I mean, we've done,
I can just tell you, in the back rooms, they're using the museum as a counterpoint for the air rights.
I think the master plan is the idea.
Absolutely.
Do you think it would make any sense, I'm just gonna bring up my other point again, for the committee to advocate, and maybe it's a separate resolution, or maybe it's something we work with the Manhattan Borough President on, of getting money to have a plan, you know, to look at the zoning analyses of these areas?
We
I mean,
could-
I look to you, because I know you've looked at a lot of this, but, you know, like a George Janes plan, like he did, you know, like those terrific plans, where you're really looking at what could really happen here on all those sites.
I think that's
I
a
don't know.
much bigger
City
initiative.
commission.
We
It
shouldn't-
is.
Not saying we
Well,
shouldn't work on it, I just don't know that it goes in
You know,
this.
there is.
No,
a
I don't think it
board
goes here, I
advisory
agree.
We could fund
to-
it.
and
so
the
can we
advisory.
call the question, are we at that point?
Wait,
Yeah.
Luis had a question at one point, I don't know if
I
it
just
went
want to
away.
make a statement, if anybody hasn't seen the remediation presentation, there is a town hall being held at Pier 17 on the 20th, where they will be making their presentation, and people, they're inviting the public to come and ask all the questions you want.
Who will be?
The people who made
office-
the presentation to us last week.
Howard
Okay,
Hughes
Howard,
and
okay.
The
So
remediation,
Langan,
yeah.
let's vote on this.
So to get the facts from the people who are actually doing the work.
I
Okay.
don't think that would change with
No,
this
I'm just making
resolution.
everybody, you know, so if you haven't had the
Another
opportunity
meeting.
Let's
to
call
hear
the
it.
question.
Can I ask,
So-
call the question again?
Wait,
Oh, sorry.
do we have, I just want to be respectful of the community members who've joined us, and we'll go here first. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is Paul Kiefer, I'm the president of Southbridge Towers. I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing from this committee. Southbridge has never been a NIMBY. We know something could be built 120 feet, so we're willing to, you know, accept those parameters. But we also feel that nothing should be done on that site until we have a plan on what's going to be built there. I've spoken to real estate developers who have done the brownfield program, and they said that they've, you know, to do what they wanted to, they had a certain level of clean that they reached. But then when they sold the property, and then there was development, there had to be a second brownfield. So that's something we want to avoid. We don't want two brownfields, we want one brownfield when we know what's going there. So I thank the committee for this great discussion, and we appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Sir in the back, just identify yourself, please.
I'm Warren Green, I'm also a director of Southbridge. My major concern is that my major concern is why Howard Hughes is spending the money without having to give the community board and the community a full plan of what they plan on doing, because if they don't get approval down the road, they may walk away the way they did in the Midwest, or the same way that the Con Ed site on the East River is
We
dead.
just talked about this.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, I just
Sorry.
was asked to share the skepticism these gentlemen expressed about Howard Hughes living up to the zoning ordinances that are already here. And as a parent of 2 children at Peg Slip, I also have skepticism about them putting the safety and well-being of our kids before profit. So if this resolution is going to be made, if there's some way we could include something about also making absolutely certain that all of the health benefits that they're promising are going to be like to the satisfaction of parents, anything along those lines.
Now, let's keep it clean.
But there are
So-
also a lot of seniors in the area also, so
doing
it's not
anything.
like-
But remember, we're saying don't do anything.
Right.
We're saying until you show us the
Yeah.
master plan,
that's true.
so we
So,
know.
yeah, we'll wait.
Don't do anything.
On the
It's a
question.
point well taken, Matt, but we'll make that point when it goes forward. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Megan Malvern, I'm a parent at Peck Slip. To Matt's point, but there's just 3 points I wanted to talk about, is that earlier, when you were talking about that they said they had air monitors going off, when they go off, it's too late, is sort of my point. And also, the EPA standards are to an average male. These are 3-year-old kids, 5-year-old kids. So, and so when they say that they've safely remediated this sort of site in the past, they also haven't done it with a playground that abuts the property.
So one of the things is during this process, we would need to make sure, because they asked for
Agreed.
public input, I hope you put that in a letter to them.
Yep, so I just wanna, so when they say and they cite EPA standards, they're not the standards that we need met in this specific location for this specific cleanup. That was one thing. The other thing is that they talked about that the OER, I talked to the people at the OER, there's a voluntary OER, not this E-zone mandated one. So there is another option that is not within the brownfield. It sounded like during the DEC conversation we were having that they were saying it was the only way they could go because they aren't E-zoned. There is a voluntary program in the OER, just
Right, so the reason
that
they're
can stay.
electing this is also for the liability.
Exactly,
Yes.
and also the tax benefits.
Right.
And then the other thing, a very important part that I think you brought up is that in the brownfield application, it just cites that they have a plan. And I think it's very important that you put in an approved plan, because Howard Hughes will say that they've met their obligations to the BCP. And I think that we're making a very specific point that this isn't a regular plan.
That's it.
Yeah,
It's in there.
that's what we're looking at.
And also, there's a possibility of an overrun of liability. If it turns out that the brownfield seeps underneath the streets into some of the other areas, then you have to have coverage for that too, and that's danger to the community, the kids, and everyone's health. And that isn't covered by the obligation of
But it
developer.
is investigated, as my understanding from the call, it's investigated at that same time, and then if it has happened, the state does remediate it.
Yeah, but I think there was a concern of how much budget there is for that, and it's not clear
They have
that
to do it.
you're gonna actually have the same reaction, that it'll be done as well and in a timely manner. It's just extra problems.
Okay, so with that, okay, last question.
Hi, Jennifer Glazer. I'm a resident on Water Street. I'm glad the board's taking a bit of a more proactive stance on this, because basically Howard Hughes has played this board and played the city for years. All they do is bait and switch all the time. And as far as I'm concerned, they haven't done anything good in the Seaport. Nothing, so don't expect anything good here. Also, being a resident of Water Street, I lived through 9/11, and I lived through Sandy, and I waded around in water up to my neck on Water Street and in our building during Sandy. And knowing Howard Hughes, they would leave a big pit full of mercury, waiting for something like that to happen. That's going right into my building. And now we have 2 schools and we have children to think of. I think you need to play hardball with these people and not, no nice guy anymore, because they've really run roughshod over this community. The other thing, I was wondering whether somehow an environmental impact study could be required for the site.
If
From
it's
the state.
rezoned, they will have to do an EIS, but.
Well, we don't want it to get
But
rezoned.
these EISs are not
Yeah.
worth all that much.
They
They're-
take
they're-
time, though.
they're- Okay, we'll leave it at that.
All right, with that, we're going to close the question and call the question on the resolution that we've worked on.
Second.
Okay? So all in favor? Any opposed? Recusals, abstentions? I stole your line again.
You do it so well.
Oh, I'm in, I'm approved.
Thank you.
All right, it's unanimous. Motion carries.
All right. So it's late, but we had a third item about super talls. It's listed as tentative, so let's do that another time. That's just carrying on from the resolution that we did with regard to voids. Joey's listening in.
I am. All right, I'm shutting this off.